Want to turn off the heating? Tell us the house. These words were spoken with such a cold and calculation that the frost walked on the back, although baby was later in the yard, and the leaves from the trees were still lazily circled in the air, refusing to fall. Gaston and I sat in the kitchen, not understanding how such threats could escape from the lips of those whom we once called the family. My relatives threatened us, standing at our door, accompanied by a whole gang, as if someone had recreated a scene from a cheap action movie on the porch of our little but a cozy house, which we tried to save with such difficulty. They thought that fear would force me and my husband to surrender, crawl on my knees, transfer the keys and recognize the defeat, but they had no idea about my past, which the shadow followed me, always ready to remind who I was before Katerina, a modest librarian hiding my combat scars behind a neat hairstyle and glasses in thin rim. They were mistaken in the choice, and they will pay for it. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you watched this video. Pleasant viewing. My name is Katerina, I am 20-8 years old, and, despite the seeming silence of my present life, I am a woman with a story that it is better not to whisper in dark alleys. I am a librarian, yes, but my past is more like a thriller than a quiet life of a bookworm. I grew up in an area that taught me to survive more than any school, an area where weakness was felt like blood and water, and where I had to fight for every day. It was then that I began to train, not for the sake of glory or medals, but in order to be able to stand up for myself and for those who are nearby. I became a lightweight boxing champion and mastered martial arts not for the sake of trophies, but so that no one else dared to talk with me high. I was then nicknamed Riptide, a whirlwind, calm in appearance, but ruthless when they step on him. I learned to remain calm for a long time until the moment came when calm was replaced by action, fast and decisive, and then I swept everything away, leaving no chance. I remember the day when I met Gaston, a day that seemed ordinary until fate decided otherwise. It all started, as always, with the arrangement of books on the shelves and elusive thoughts, hovering among book dust and rustle of pages. Literary heroes replaced me with people, and I secretly enjoyed loneliness until the evening came. When I left work that day, the sky was covered with gray, and several cool guys decided that I was a slight prey. I noticed them as soon as they came up, confident, lazily cheeky, and even then I knew how it would end. But then he intervened. All this knightly spirit and bravado, hey, leave it alone, he shouted, rising between me and them, as if he were a character from another century, who did not know that good does not always win. I rolled my eyes, realizing that I could handle it myself, and at some point I even felt annoyed I did not need help. But deep down, I appreciated this gesture. He did not know who he was dealing with, and still chose to join. The bandits laughed, viciously and loudly. "What are you going to do with this?" One of them grinned, clearly enjoying his advantage. Before I could come to my senses, my fists flew into the air. Gaston received a blow, sharp, with the right, and his body fell back. Then I intervened. My preparation made itself felt, the blows went quickly, for sure, and after a few minutes the bandits already ran away, cherishing not only their pride, but also their bruises. Gaston lay on the ground, raising himself on his elbows, healing his broken lip and looking at me with such an expression, as if he first saw a real superhero. "Wow, it was amazing," he exclaimed, and blood, reverence and barely noticeable admiration mixed in his voice. "By the way, my name is Gaston." "Katerina," I replied, holding out his hand in which the stress of the recent battle was still felt. From that day we were inseparable. He became my support, and I became his shield. His parents met me with open arms, as if always waiting for my appearance. His mother always said, "You are a daughter who I never had," and there was no falsehood in her voice. And the father, frowning from back pain, chuckled, "Well, she, of course, is the defender in which we did not even suspect that we needed." But not everyone was delighted with this idol. Nestor, Gaston's younger brother, was different. When I first met him, he looked at me with a grin, in which everything was red, from skepticism to contempt. "Librarian, yes?" He grinned. "What are you doing? Read all day?" I shrugged. "And I keep the world of knowledge and security for people like you," I retorted. He laughed, a sharp sound from which he wanted to put on gloves again. I prefer women with more sharp features. I raised an eyebrow. Believe me, I have more opportunities than you can imagine. We stopped at this, concluding a fragility among themselves, in which everyone knew there will still be a moment when everything will change. But while I could breathe calmly, but I can say that this is only the beginning of our history, a story that will challenge me, which I have never expected. That evening I returned home. The house was quiet, except for the sounds that came from the kitchen, where Gaston, already habitually singing under his breath, prepared dinner, and the aroma of garlic, tomatoes and fresh herbs filled the air with comfort, creating the illusion of peace and safety, to which we strove so much after the months of loss and anxious unknown. The smell of spaghetti was almost like salvation, a simple pleasure that could at least not for a short time erase the severity of the day. You won't believe what my day I had, I started, entering the kitchen and dropping into a chair, feeling the tension restrained all day, begins to leave slowly. Gaston turned around, and his smile, soft and sincere, as if she brushed off me all the fatigue that had accumulated not only in a day, but seemed to be in recent months. Let me guess, another round with a set of encyclopedias? He said with teasing in his voice, and I could not resist laughter. Something like this, I replied, covering my eyes and enjoying the moment of silence. We returned to the usual rhythm, to a peaceful life that we tried to build for so long, and let it be interrupted by the echoes of my past, we still believed that we could resist. Then I still did not know how much my old life would go into my new one, with the power of a hurricane, sweeping away what seemed strong, accepting everything to the strength, from our solutions to the very essence of the relationship. But at the moment I was satisfied. I gained a new beginning, a chance of a life that I never thought that I would have, the opportunity not to hide and defend myself, but simply to be a wife, a friend, a woman who does not need to wear armor every day. At first, Gaston's father died, quietly, almost imperceptibly, leaving behind the silence, to which we could not get used to. Then his mother fell asleep in the chair by the window and did not wake up, as if her soul decided to follow him, not cope with loneliness. After the dust disappeared, and we stopped waking up from the steps that were no longer there, we found that we have to live in a new norm, where the house belongs only to us, and empty rooms respond with an echo in which memories are heard. They left us a small but cozy house in a decent area of the city, filled with light and books, and Nestor got an apartment on the other end of the city, cramped, noisy, but their own. It seemed that everything could calm down, but these were only good wishes, an attempt to convince yourself that the most difficult thing is behind. I remember the day when Nestor without warning appeared on our doorstep with his new wife, Franca. She entered the house like a hurricane, with force and self-confidence, which bordered on insolence. She was a whirlwind of emotions and tattoos, and each of them stretched through her hands, like combat scars telling about life, full storms and clashes. I sorted out the old boxes when they broke, I recalled later. Hey, look that the cat dragged, Nestor announced with a grin, and the usual mockery was heard in his voice. Francesca stood behind him, chewing gum and inspecting our house with the look of the mistress who returned for her. You have a great dwelling, she said, and in her voice a strange mixture of admiration and contempt sounded in her voice, as if she was looking at the house, but the goods in the window. I got up, wiping my hands on jeans, trying to maintain external calm. Thank you. We like it. And you? I asked, hoping that the conversation would remain in the framework of politeness. She laughed with a sharp, barking sound from which her nerves trembled. I am Francesca, the second half of Nestor. And by better, I mean much better, she added with such a challenge that I had to not strain my fists. I could not help laughing. Well, Francesca, welcome to our house. Try not to break anything, including Nestor. Nestor rolled his eyes. Eternal joker, yes, Katerina, he said with a grin. But seriously, this place is too cute for a couple of books. You should see what kind of landfill we are, Francesca intervened. Yes, we thought here, maybe we'll change, understand? You take an apartment, and we take this little paradise. Gaston, who was silent before, laughed briefly, but firmly. I think we will save what belongs to us. Thank you. The conversation was tense, and many unspoken problems were in the air. Francesca paced around the house, and each of her movement was designed to intimidate, as if she had checked where the weaknesses where she could be pressed. But I'm not one of those who retreat. Listen, Francesca, I began in an even voice, without increasing intonation, but leaving no room for doubt. This is our house, and you are like a family here. But do not cross the line. We all have to live our own life. She clicked with chewing gum and stared at me. In her gaze there was a cold, like ice steel. Oh, I just started, dear. I like the challenges, and this place, she circled her hand around, will be mine. The courage was almost ridiculous. Almost. I exchanged gaze with Gaston, who shook my head slightly, silently making it clear that it was time to let go of the situation, at least for today. After that, they did not linger for a long time, but the tension was preserved, like an unpleasant odor, which cannot be eliminated. After they left, Gaston and I sat in the living room. There was a heavy silence between us, filled not with words, but with forebodings. Can you believe them? I finally said. Gaston sighed, running his hand through his hair, obviously not finding words. Nestor was always difficult, but Francesca. She is something. I can deal with her, I said, more than to himself. I came across the worst. But as the days turned into weeks and months, this meeting marked the beginning of a series of events that checked our patience and our determination. The bold claim to our house was not just empty conversations. It was a declaration of war, and we were right under the sight, as if each of our steps were monitored, each word was fixed and twisted to use it against us. At first, troubles began with small, annoying things, those that seemed to be attributed to the accident or pranks of adolescence, but when they are repeated day after day, you begin to understand that someone's evil will is behind this. I woke up in the morning and found garbage thrown through our fence, empty bottles, pieces of paper with insults, scraps of photographs, once even cigarette butts laid in the form of a cross. Or, it happened, disgusting words written by a spray can on the wall of the house, where ivy and hydrangeas have recently bloomed, "Get out," or "Unwanted guest." It was childish, primitively, but it was nervous, made me feel driven into a corner in my own house, and I had no doubt Francesca stood behind all this, with her poisonous sense of humor and thirst for dominance. Suspicion was confirmed when the situation was aggravated so much that it became impossible to ignore. One morning, on one of those alarming days when you already wake up with a feeling of impending trouble, I opened the door and found a dead bird neatly laid on our threshold. Her neck was strangely twisted, and the feathers were covered with something sticky, stinking. It was a perverted warning, silent, but frighteningly loud. Anger boiled in me, rising from the bottom of the soul, where that riptide was still stored, the tornado that I learned to restrain the years of discipline. I raked the body with a shovel, threw it into the garbage tank and closed the lid with such a sound, as if trying to crush the malice itself, which penetrated into our lives. Dark thoughts were swarming in my head, not so much about revenge, but about how far everything can go. I decided to postpone the answer so far, hoping that common sense would still prevail, but then Francesca went on. One afternoon, when the usual silence reigned in the library, it entered, with the same smug expression that I remembered from the first meeting, with a hairstyle, more like a challenge, and a gait, like an actress on the catwalk. "Hey, a book botanist," she shouted loudly enough for everyone to hear, including schoolchildren in the children's department and an old woman who leafed through the newspaper in the far corner. I turned, keeping a neutral expression on my face, although inside everything clenched into a tight knot. "Can I help you?" I asked, holding my voice even. She grinned, her eyes flashed with anger, which she did not even try to hide. "I just wanted to see where the famous Katerina Spencer days," she said, looking around the book racks with the same species with which the predator evaluates the territory. "You have a rather boring life here, right?" I shrugged, trying my best to maintain composure, because I knew, if I succumbed, everything would end badly. "This is earnings." "What do you want, Francesca?" She leaned closer, and the smoke of cigarettes, sharp and annoying, like a symbol of her whole essence, burst out of her breath. "Just a friendly visit. But let me give you a little advice. Refuse home and all this," she circled around, as if she had already been a mistress, "and everything will stop. Everything is simple. Before I could answer, she began to discard books from the shelves, one by one, laughing loudly. Her laughter echoed a quiet room in which only a whisper of pages and rustling steps previously reigned. I grabbed her hand, stopping the movement with such force that her wrist jerked sharply. Enough, Francesca. Leave it right now, or I will call the police. She pulled out her hand, still grinning, but now a shadow slipped in her eyes. You would not dare. To see you here, Katerina. She did not have time to finish, because I already turned to the rack and began to raise books. I spent the next hour in complete silence, collecting my thoughts from the floor along with the volumes of literature. My mind was a whirlwind of anger and disappointment. I felt my hands trembling and jaws squeezed, and I wanted to fight her, put in place, make her shut up once and for all. But I remembered my promise to remain calm. I remembered how important it is not to give her weapons in her hands. I could not let her see that she had hit me. That evening, I called Nestor, hoping that the remnants of the mind still live in his head. Nestor, your wife got out of control. Today she came to the library and arranged a scene. This needs to be put an end. There was a pause, deaf and long. Then he laughed. Katerina, as always, is so dramatic. Francesca is just having fun. But what will I tell you? Give us the house, and I will make sure that she leaves you alone. I squeezed my fist, feeling the old fire flared up, the one that I tried to extinguish for years. This will not happen, Nestor. Control your wife, or I will take business in your own hands. He grinned, as if waiting for these words. Loud words, Katerina. Just remember, you started it. We hung up the phone, and the threat hung in the air, like a black cloud in front of a thunderstorm. I did not tell Gaston about the call, not wanting to worry him more than necessary. But I knew, the situation will worsen. It was only a matter of time when Francesca or Nestor will take their next step, and I had to be ready. The tension was like a dense fog, leaking into all corners of our house, penetrating through the walls and doors, leaving behind a feeling of someone else's presence. One evening, when I returned home from the library, my nerves were at the limit. On the streets it was unusually quiet, and this silence strengthened my anxiety. That's then I saw him, Nestor, staggering step towards me, with a bottle in his hand and drunken rage on his face. Hey, Katerina, he muttered, his words were saturated with alcohol and hatred. I thought you could ignore me, right? I stopped, my heart pounded as it was not beating from the very youth spent on the outskirts. Nestor, go home. You are drunk. He grinned, taking a step forward. You live in the house of my family. There is no place for you here. Before I could react, he swung at me, cutting the air with a fist with clumsy rage, drunk and uncontrollable, like its very essence, corroded by anger and envy. The instinct, hardened by years of training and survival in the cruel streets of my past, prevailed, and before his hit reached the goal, I already dodged, deftly stepping aside, and grabbed his hand, turning it in the opposite direction and abruptly pressed it to the back. He howled in pain, loudly, hoarsely like a wounded animal, and his knees bent, broke under the weight of pain and humiliation. Listen to me, Nestor, I hissed in a quiet and even voice, knowing that power is not in a cry, but in control. I don't want to hurt you, but I will defend myself if you have ever tried to raise my hand at least once. He wriggled, trying to break free, but I kept it tightly, without hesitation, with confidence that was born only from the awareness of my innocence. You are nothing, Katerina, no one, he muttered through his teeth, but his voice was already trembling. With a quick, honed movement, I threw him to the ground, using his weight against him, and his body with a deaf roar hit the sidewalk, leaving traces of not so much physical pain on the stone as a moral fall. He was lying there, helpless, and whined, plaintively, stifled, his desire to fight, his arrogance, his feigned superiority, all this evaporated, leaving only a bewildered man who finally encountered those whom he considered vulnerable. Stay away from us, Nestor, I said in a cold, icy voice in which there were no threats, but there was a warning. The next time I will not be so gentle. I left him to lie there, his curses and incoherent threats were lost in the night silence, like a shadow, spreading along the asphalt. While I was going the rest of the way home, my step was firm, but fear squeezed in my chest. Not that panic, paralyzing, but a reasonable, cautious fear, which understands the devil was crossed, and everything can worsen even more. Gaston was waiting for me to return home. He stood by the window, and, as soon as I entered, his face, complete anxiety, was illuminated by relief. "Where were you?" he asked, hugging me with such force, as if he wanted to absorb me into himself. I was terribly worried. Cracks in Nestor. It became a little hot, I admitted, avoiding his gaze. "What's happened? Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Just tired of all this. Tired of the fact that they pushed me." He hugged me stronger, without words, and in this embrace there was a silent promise, support, understanding, unity. "We will deal with this, Katerina. Together." But our problems were far from the end, and, despite the fleeting sense of relief, I understood. I reached my critical point, and there was no way back. The following days were blurred, like a watercolor after rain, out of anxiety, out of the ongoing internal tension, from whispering conversations, in which fear hid behind an apparent everyday life. The incident with Nestor shook me more than I wanted to admit even to myself. I knew that I had to tell Gaston everything, to the smallest details, so that we could act together. But part of me was afraid that he would see me differently if he finds out the whole truth, if he understands what kind of violence I am capable of, even if it is in response, even if it is a forced measure. When Gaston finally returned from the trip, which I left for a couple of days at work, I was a lump of nerves, the tension burned from the inside. He looked tired, wrinkles on his face became deeper than before, but when he entered, dropping his bags, he immediately came up to me and hugged. In his arms there was a silent question. "Katerina, what happened? You are trembling." I took a deep breath, unable to restrain the words anymore, and they flew out like an avalanche, breaking off my lips. "This is Nestor and Francesca. They terrorized us, and gets worse." In his eyes, confusion and anger flashed, like a storm, rising from the depths. "What do you mean? What's happened?" he asked, sitting opposite. I told him everything, from a dead bird on the threshold to a visit to the library, until a recent meeting with Nestor and my reaction. With every word I saw how shock, pain, and powerlessness are replaced on his face. "Have you dealt with this alone? Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, and there was no reproach in his voice, only sadness. "I didn't want to bother you," I admitted, dropping my eyes, "and I thought I could handle it." He sighed, not looking away. "Katerina, we are together. You do not need to carry this burden alone." The fault and relief spin out in me as a whirlpool in which it was difficult to distinguish, which is stronger, shame or gratitude. "I know. I'm sorry. I just didn't want you to see this side of mine. The side that fights, which causes pain to people." Gaston took my hand, tightly, confidently, as if he wanted to remind that I was not alone. "I married you for you. Your strength, your courage, they are part of who you are, and I love you for it." We talked till late at night, discussing what to do next, making plans, pondering the options that could protect us. But under all this strategy, under determination and logic, there was an unspoken fear. What if this is not enough? But what if Francesca and Nestor do not retreat? The next morning, I woke up from a quiet, but persistent phone call of Gaston. I caught only scraps of the conversation, but each of them was like a nail. "This cannot continue. We need to act. I will call the lawyer, I will recognize our options." He hung up, and determination was in his eyes, the one that I always loved in it. "We will fight this legal. And if necessary, we will take other precautions. We will not allow them to win." I nodded. "I'm with you. Whatever it costs." One awake morning, when we enjoyed a rare moment of silence, soaked into the lazy warmth of the sun, which penetrated through the translucent curtains and laid soft glare on the living room floor, a loud, sharp knock on the door broke this fragile idyll, as the stone breaks the glass surface of the pond. We exchanged cautious glances. There was no need to pronounce a word, everything was clear without words. In this gaze, full of tension and inner readiness, as if all our calm was held on a thin thread, ready to break off. I opened the door slowly, restrainedly, feeling in advance who would be on the other side, and was not mistaken. There were Nestor and Francesca. Her densely down eyes drilled me with the previous impudent insolence, and behind their backs, like the scenery for a cheap film about crime, a group of men with a rough gangster appearance, muscular, in the same faded T-shirts and unexplored T-shirts and unexpected call in the eyes. A smug grin of Frances, adhering to her lips, told me everything that I needed to know was another, and, as she probably hoped, the final attempt to intimidate us, force us to abandon the house, which we built not only with our hands, but also with our hearts. "Look what we brought to you," she said mockingly, waved her hand towards the crowd, as if representing another trophy, not a threat. I felt Gaston tense next to me, his shoulders froze in tension, and his breath became a little heavier, but I retained composure, straightened up and looked directly into the eyes of Francis. "It will not work, Francesca. You cannot intimidate us and drive us out of our own home." My calm, as I knew, was the strongest weapon at that moment, and it was then that the unexpected happened, the moment that turned everything upside down. Explicitly, a leader stepped forward from the crowd, a broad-shouldered man with an imperious expression on his face, with scars on the cheekbones talking about past battles, and a light chromium that gives his gait a sudden predatory. He erupted with laughter, sonorous and loud, and this laughter, inappropriate in such an environment, hung in the air, forcing everyone to freeze. "Katerina, is it really you?" he exclaimed, and laughter verse, giving way to a wide, almost good-natured smile in which I recognized the old spark. I squinted, peering into the features, and the memories surfaced like the smell of rain on hot asphalt. "Blake?" "Blake Coleman in the flesh," he confirmed with a grin. "I can't believe that it is you, Riptide." His voice called out the past, and a name that had not sounded for a long time cut through the silence, like a blade. The old nickname caused a shock in the crowd. The men behind him changed in their face. Their pose changed from hostile to attentive, respectful, as if the name Riptide awakened long-term legends in them. Francesca and Nestor were clearly confused. Confidence instantly disappeared from their faces, and now they looked like schoolchildren caught with red-handed. Blake turned to his group. "Friends, you may not know this, but Katerina is a legend. We grew up in one area. I saw her fights. Believe me, she is not one of those who should contact." Among the men, an approving murmur was swept away. Someone nodded, someone took a step back, and someone just hid his eyes, as if he was afraid that he had come to this meeting. Blake stood in front of Franca and Nestor. "You two misunderstood everything. Trying to drive Katerina out of the house? This will not pass. Not with me here." The voice of the Frances, when she tried to speak, was barely audible, like a whispering in the water. "But it should be our house. We deserve this," she muttered, obviously not believing in her words. Blake shook his head, his expression became tough. "You do not deserve anything, terrorizing people. Especially such as Katerina." Then he looked at me, and his voice became softer, as if years, distance, and memory were reflected in him. "Listen, we had disagreements, but no one dares to contact you. Not at my time." With these words, he turned and went away, and his team without words followed him, scattering in the evening light, like ghosts. Francesca and Nestor remained to stand, a defeated duet, which had neither allies, nor confidence, nor even evil fire in the eyes. When they left, silence returned to the quarter, but it was another silence, not alarming, not tense, but filled with newly respected, as if the area that hid and observed recognized my right to rest. I closed the door, leaned against her with my back, feeling how adrenaline slowly subsides, as the awareness of what happened returns with every breath. Gaston came up and hugged me, his hand lay on my back, and shock and relief mixed on his face. "I can't believe that this just happened," he whispered. I smiled, tired, but sincerely. "Me too. But I'm not complaining. We are faced with a threat, the outcome of which was the most unlikely. Sometimes the past does not just pursue you, it returns to extend the hand of help, unexpected, but necessary. Everything will be fine with us. We defended our position and won. After the confrontation with Blake and his team, the events changed dramatically, as if someone had switched the course of time, and it flowed the other way. The air around our small house was filled with changes, a tangible change in the direction of the wind, which previously carried the threat, and now, liberation. A few days later I was in the garden and saw Francesca. Her usual insolence disappeared. She looked pale, hunched over like a burden she wore, suddenly became overwhelming to her. She was alone, without Nestor, without friends, without support. She plunged the boxes into the trunk of her car. Her movements were slow, almost doomed. It was clear that she was leaving. The news spread quickly. Blake restrained his word, having kicked Francesca from the gang and breaking the latest ties on which her illusion of power was held. Without her cool friends, she no longer felt safe, and even more so strong. Her departure was quiet, almost inaudible, which sharply contrasted with her former loud, causing presence. A few days later, Nestor arrived in a car full of things, and although the engine of his old sedan was noisy, as if he had fought with the time itself, there was no threat or tension in this approximation, only the severity of farewell. He stopped at our entrance, as if not daring to go out, but, having gathered with the spirit, he nevertheless opened the door and stepped towards the unknown, and I, without hesitation, left the house to meet him halfway, because in these last gestures there was still important, not completion, but closing. "Katerina," he began, without raising his eyes. His voice was muffled, almost apologizing. "I'm leaving too. Sold the apartment. It's time to start all over again. Far from here." In his voice there was no sharpness to which I got used to. There was no familiar call, only fatigue, deep, conscious, as if he himself finally understood how far he went, and now tried to return to a more even road. I looked at him calmly, not with suspicion and not with anger, but as a person who, perhaps, still broke life, but not to the end. "Nestor," I said in a neutral tone, trying to speak without emotions, but not without meaning. "I hope you find what you are looking for, and you will extract a lesson from all this." He nodded, his gaze was still stubbornly hiding somewhere in the asphalt. "I'm sorry, Katerina. For everything. For all troubles. I was wrong." And, not expecting forgiveness from me, he got into the car and left, leaving behind the conflicts and a trace of regrets that dissolved in the sound of a retiring engine. The street, which until recently seemed the battlefield, was quiet again, like a scene after the performance, where the actors left the stage, and the audience, their places. Inside, Gaston and I watched from the window without saying a word, because we were covered with surrealist relief, a rare feeling when the tension leaves not in one moment, but slowly dissipates, like a fog that passes through the first rays of the sun. "They left," I said, hardly not believing, and my voice sounded like an echo of thought. "So," muttered Gaston, hugging my shoulder, and in his gesture there was everything: amazement, joy, protection. "It's over. Now we can move on." The setting sun threw long shadows to the house, turning the street into a gold picture of peace, and gratitude boiled in me for this unexpected turn of fate, which brought us here, not where we strove, but where we really had a place. On the day, when Francesca and Nestor left, the district seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, almost physically, significantly, as if the whole quarter was freed from the heavy breathing of fear, which had been in the air for so long. It has become easier, fresh, filled with new opportunities, a new space for life without looking back. Gaston and I were in a state of calm, which used to be invisible, but now it was felt especially brightly, like silence after a storm, like water that became a stitch after a whirlwind. It was a calm that you notice only when constant noise disappears, and you understand how tired you were. One evening, when the last rays of the sun fell beyond the horizon, staining the sky in copper and lavender tones, we sat on the porch, in silent unity, with cups of tea in our hands, protecting this fragile but stable peace. "Can you believe that it ended?" I asked, and in my voice surprise and relief, mixed in a new shade of calm happiness, sounded. Gaston smiled softly, wrapping my hand at me. "Honestly, no. It feels like we woke up from a bad dream." I grinned. It was a real, sincere sound that has not been in my lips for a long time, because recently it was more and more often that I had to restrain not laughter, but tears. Really bad sleep. But, hey, now we woke up. Every day that dark chapter, whose name was Francesca and Nestor, more and more married, becoming part of the past, which, although she left scars, no longer owned the present. Our house again became a refuge, filled with love and laughter, and not stress and fear, and each corner again gained its previous warmth. I returned to my routine, gardening, reading, library, and in this simple everyday life I found healing. The simple joys of life in the neighborhood, once overshadowed by fear and conflicts, now shone brighter than before: evening walks, conversations through a fence, general moments of unity with those who share your world. The path was long and full of difficulties, but he made us stronger, and our ties with each other, and with neighbors, became deeper and stronger. The world that now fills our house is not just a lack of conflicts. This presence is understanding, stamina, love. Write a comment what you think about this story, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel and like. See you soon.